Dwight Howard is making the rounds again, and he's talking a lot about the previous Lakers team that he was on that won the title in 2020. We're going to talk more about that here today, so let's go ahead and dive in. So, as you guys know, after 2020 and the bubble and all of that, the Lakers overturned the roster nearly completely, but I want to take you back a little bit in just a moment to talk about 2021 in hindsight overall. But here's a quote in which 94 Feet of Game, aka Phil Handy, talks about or agrees with a quote from Dwight where he says, Rob Pelinka kind of messed up the dynasty we were starting. We would have had at least 2 championships and the opportunity to fight for a third one. And then you see the reply here from 94 Feet. That is, again, Phil Handy saying facts. I'm curious if he's airing Rob out just in general, like Phil here, like facts, like I hate Rob, or if he's just agreeing with the second half of this where, you know, if they were able to run it back, they might have won more championships. So before I talk about 2021, I want to know from you guys, if the Lakers ran back their 2020 title team, do you think they would have won in 2021? So the reason why they shifted the roster so much, by the way, just don't mind the background. It's kind of like it's in a transition period. The reason they shifted 2021's roster team so much was because coming off of the layoff and then into the playoffs in the bubble and all that stuff and the very short turnaround afterwards. It was just a weird season because of 2020, you know, shenanigans in 2020 in the world and stuff like that. I'm not sure if we should be saying the actual word, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, because like there was a period where it was like taboo to mention that in videos, so I don't know. Anyway, that being said, they have that season get shut down. They go a few months with a layoff, then they come back. They play for a couple of months, and then there's basically a few weeks, like a month max or so, if I remember correctly, before the season starts back up again that following year. And in hindsight, the teams that played in the bubble and went pretty far didn't do very good the next year, as you would imagine, because of injuries, fatigue, things like that. Now, a lot of people would tell you that because they got a few months off, you know, in the middle there before the bubble started, that should suffice. These guys should be good to go and keep going, you know, throughout that period, and you didn't need to overturn the roster. So if it wasn't clear, they overturned the roster because, you know, these guys are going to have tired legs. You got to battle through another regular season and playoff run, things like that. That's why they did it for the most part. Now, also on that topic, as it relates to Dwight specifically, a lot of people may not remember this, but Dwight actually himself was coming back for all of like 10 minutes right before the Montrezl Harrell news came out. He said, I believe on Twitter, if I remember properly, that he was going to be returning to the team and then reneged that instantly. So I'm not sure exactly all of the details personally on what happened there, but that is also a thing. Dwight was supposed to come back in 2021. He does come back in 2022, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So anyway, moving on. So that's why they changed the team around. Now, if we go back to 2021, that was an interesting season because that season was crazy. They start the year 21-6. That's the year where they had Montrez, Marc Gasol, Dennis Schroeder, and they were a damn good team. I'm going to tell you something I think is pretty interesting. I actually think the 21 team is better than the 20 team. I think they fit better. They had better chemistry because the whole core mostly is there. You shuffle out some of the bigs. I don't want to underrate the value of the bigs, but the point is with the bigs that they had last year, if you go back to the game logs from the playoffs, there were entire series where JaVale or Dwight were just non-factors in the playoffs. They literally sat them entirely. What was it? Was it the Houston series where they were just like, no, we're not playing pretty much any of you guys because of the way Houston's built. And then the following series, it was Portland and then Houston, right? One of those series, one guy played, and then against Denver, Dwight played a decent bit, and he got a good look at Jokic there, and he did pretty well there against pre-prime Jokic, but nonetheless, that was kind of the thing there. So, like, I think the logic is that those guys may or may not have been a little bit expendable at that point. And again, you bring in Marc Gasol, who a lot of fans don't really love, but he was pretty good for the team. Again, hot take to say that online, I know, because people just remember him being a bit slow-footed, but he meshed really well with that team and their core, fit perfectly with AD, and then also Trez was a nice little spark plug off the bench for that team, worked pretty well. And also, you had LeBron playing at MVP caliber. That's the year where LeBron, if I remember correctly, this is really funny. If I remember correctly, they had early in that season, because they started that year 21-6. Early in that season, they had DPOY projections, and LeBron was on the list. He was cooking that year. And then he's also the leading candidate for the MVP that year. But then, unfortunately, Solomon Hill happens, right? That's that year. So they were super damn good. And you know one thing that I will not forget from that last year before the Hill injury, and then AD goes down a little bit later and all that stuff, blah, blah. One thing I won't forget about that team is how easy they made it look. Like they, on that 21-6 run, they looked like they were coasting the whole time. And I'm dead serious. They looked like they were coasting that entire time. So I truly think that they were better than even that record suggested, at least relative to the competition they played in those games, obviously. You can only play who's in front of you. I don't remember their strength of schedule at that point, obviously. But they looked like they were coasting, especially those first few games. They looked like they were going half energy. I'm not kidding. So I really think they were better that year. Now, back to Dwight. If they run it back, how do things look? Well, it's impossible to say. Does LeBron still get that injury? There's a million different variables that may or may not have happened. Because the reason why that season got blown on its face was because two things. LeBron came back and was clearly not himself. We saw something similar a couple of years ago in that 2023 playoff run where he looked like he just didn't have any burst. He was able to perform at 80% of himself, but that's a huge difference when you talk about a guy as good as LeBron is. And so in that playoffs, he came back and wasn't himself, right? But they were still up big in that series because AD was so damn good. And they probably, even with a diminished LeBron, because again, came back off that injury. He himself said he'll probably never feel exactly as good as he once did. I hella just spit forward. All the different things that took place there. And then when AD went down, I don't want to say exposed, but LeBron was unable to carry that team the same way. And then momentum got on the other side, and they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't because he wasn't able to do it because he wasn't himself. And he even brought it up again. He didn't look anything like he did earlier in that year because of that injury. And then he came back, rushed back. He's actually done that a few times. You know, he did the same thing in his first year with the Lakers, if you go back to there, where he's got that injury and then the reporting is super sketchy around it. It's like, oh, LeBron's coming back. Rich Paul's like, he's not coming back yet. But we don't know when he's coming back. The Lakers reporting he's close to coming back, things like that. Reporting was super sketchy. And then he comes back and he's like, I'm activating playoff mode. And then you've probably seen the graphics where that just didn't work out. But it's because, dude, he couldn't access to that version of himself, basically. He came back too soon. So more or less that happened that year. But the funny thing is AD was so good in that playoffs. And in hindsight, if you look at 2021, this is not meant to disparage the Suns in any way. But I think that team could have also went on the same run the Suns did and made it to the finals. Now, I'm not sure with the 2021 roster that we had or with a run-back roster of the 2020 team in that situation if they would have beat the Bucks because Giannis was on a mission. That's my only, I'm not really sure, right? So that's where maybe they do. Maybe they do because Giannis was able to exploit the Suns. He wouldn't have been able to exploit the Lakers as easily. So that's more or less what I would think about. And then also, Chris was playing super good for the Bucks back then. But, I think that LeBron would still be the third best player in that series at worst, right? So that's more or less where I would consider that to be. And then also another thing that happened in that playoff run versus the Suns was a lot of the guys disappeared. Does that still happen? If they run it back with the same team from 2020, do you have Kuz? Well, in this case, it would be a little bit different. Who is it? Rondo? Was Rondo on that 2020? I don't think he was. Caruso was there. KCP was there. Those guys were good on defense, but I remember bagels. I remember in that series distinctly, LeBron had to pull KCP to the side and be like, bro, shoot the damn ball. He's not wanting to shoot. He's shoot the ball. What are you guys doing? So Kuz, I believe, also wasn't doing very good. So that's kind of where that series was. And so these are core pieces from the year prior. And I'm not sure if these guys perform any better if you run it back, because what actually happens here is here's my thing. If LeBron is healthy, I think that's the swing for me. If LeBron's healthy, AD doesn't go down in the first round as well in 2021. If you have a healthy LeBron and AD doesn't go down, you could okay. Either team. If it was the 2020 team ran back or the 21 team, I think they're winning, right? But that wasn't the case. And so you have a situation where I think the team was better the following year. And if you go back to the offseason, the talk was actually about how much better the Lakers were. Nobody thought they were worse. Nobody thought that they didn't have a good offseason. Rob was getting praise for the changes that he was able to make, especially in a short window like that. And that just, I think that in hindsight, we don't remember these things. So on the topic of Dwight, he says, Rob messed it up. He was, we were starting, he messed up the dynasty we were starting. We would have had at least 2 championships and the opportunity to fight for a third one. So Dwight clearly believes they would have won the next year. But like I mentioned earlier, are all things even? Do these guys get hurt? Because that's the big, throughout the following couple of years, that's really what derailed these guys. Now, talking about the following year, because he said they would have had an opportunity to defend the third one. Okay, let's say you win the second one. Does he decide to turn the team over at that point? I'm not sure. I mean, at that point, you're coming off 2 tumultuous seasons, because the following season also was pretty weird. There was no fans in the stands for the most part. I think they got the fans back a little bit towards the end of the season. It was another short off season, if I remember correctly, short turnaround there too. So again, you're dealing with it twofold at that point. I think the smart thing to do at that point would be to overturn the team, if I'm being honest, if I'm being completely honest, because all the while these guys are all getting older. It's not like Dwight's a spring chicken. He's not. So he's damn near as old as LeBron is. So like, that's kind of where you run into problems with that. But that following year, things got kind of a little bit weird. And this wasn't supposed to be a full like chronicle of the history of the Lakers for this time period, but I guess we're going to do this a little bit. Things got a little bit weird with the Brooklyn Nets putting together their super team of 3 superstars with Kyrie, Harden, and Durant. And the Lakers looked at that and said, we need to match this, because they thought they were going to be in the finals. And that's where you also blow the roster up more. And again, in hindsight, with all that we know, it doesn't look good. But in the moment, despite the fit concerns, I could see why it would look good. Russ is coming off of a really impressive season as well with the Wizards. These guys didn't do anything in the playoffs. I already brought that up. So, like, I can see where the vision is. And that's where things, like I said, get a little bit interesting, because Dwight winds up coming back the following year. I don't think a lot of Lakers fans remember that season, because Dwight was not good that year. He just wasn't. He wasn't deserving. He was the type of guy where when they get old, they're good for one good game every few games. And that's what Dwight was. And that's a big reason he's no longer in the league anymore, despite still trying to play basketball. It's because he's unable to perform at the same level he did as recently as 2020. But for these older guys, 2020 was a long time ago, right? It was only a few years ago, 3-4 years ago for us. 4 years ago, obviously. But for these guys that are in their mid to late 30s, a lot can change athletically for them, especially depending on how dominant their skill set is in terms, or how developed their skill set is in terms of like what they need to accomplish on the court. And with Dwight specifically, he looked bulky, he looked slow, he looked stiff, and had no fluidity to his game. He could barely catch lobs that last year. It was not good. It was not good. So I don't know if he looks like that in 21, but at the same time, that's a lot of difference between just 1 year, from 2020 to 22, where that 21 year, I believe he was in Philadelphia. That's a lot of difference for 1 year, right? So I think that that's the tricky thing with him is I don't know how reliable he is at that point, if there's a fall off in there somewhere, right? So that's what I'm thinking about. But all in all, okay, I don't really disagree that if they ran it back, they might have won it, if all things, even if they weren't able to stay healthy, right? But I could also say the same, like I mentioned earlier, for the 21 team that they wound up having. If they were healthy, I think they make it all the way there, because again, not to disparage the Suns, that wasn't a great run in terms of like competition wise. That might have been the weakest West in the last like 5 years. It might have, because everyone was down that year. And then you look at the West after that, it's hellacious, right? I got to go back to 22. But anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you subscribe to the Basketball Bulletin. Post down below your thoughts on the things that I brought up here. Do you agree with me or Dwight? And if you want to see more videos like this, there should be some on the screen right now for you.